Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Know the Patterns Live, where we chat with community leaders, entrepreneurs, families, and passionate individuals who believe in changing the narrative. Tonight, we chat with Adaeze Okorie, and she is driven by education inequality studies. Adaeze recognizes the great need for anti-racist education in her home state of New Hampshire. She uses her public health background to harness the power of community partnerships and collaboration stakeholders to address this need to prevent further harm and outcomes for New Hampshire youth. We're also chatting with Grace Landry. Grace is passionate about the power of youth voices and the possibility of systemic change. Grace is a graduate of the NHSS Class of 2017, and she began to petition to end whitewash curriculum in New Hampshire in hopes that future students across the state receive a more complete education. She applies her design education to address the educational reform through the holistic process that builds trust and relationships. So grab your blanket, cup of tea, and sit back and enjoy this chat as we learn more about Grace and Adaeze and their commitment to stop the lies. Welcome, Grace and Adaeze.
Thank you for having us.
You're welcome. So glad that you're here today. So whoever wants to start first, just tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sounds good. Adaeze, do you want to go first or?
Sure. Hello, everyone. So my name's Adaeze, and I was born in Nigeria, and my parents and I actually moved to the U.S. when I was about 2 years old, and I grew up in New Hampshire ever since then. And I am a graduate of Cornell University. I graduated in May 2020 with a bachelor's in biology and society in health equity. And I now work at Cornell Health at the Spartan Center for Health Initiatives as a public health fellow. And I will be starting my master's in public health in the fall.
Great.
Awesome. And then, I think Adaeze mentioned from Nashua. So I'm also from Nashua, New Hampshire, grew up there. And I attended, Nashua public schools all throughout until I got to college. And so I'm now currently at Drexel University in junior and studying product design and public health. But my interest in education really stemmed from my experience growing up in the Nashua public schools and not realizing until college, that's kind of how not until college I realized that I hadn't heard the term systemic racism or white privilege, and I got to freshman year and I had a course, an English course actually, but it was about how, through the lens of writing, how to address and critically think about systemic racism and the inequities in our society. And that was a turning point for me where I realized that my education had completely neglected to inform me on any of that. And I was very ignorant to a lot of it as a lack of education. And so that really swayed my outlook on the world. And so that's kind of how I got interested in this work back in 2017, just in general of education and the impact that that can have. And so last June at the murder of George Floyd, that's kind of where me and Adaeze got connected and NAIR came from.
Mm-hmm. So how did you guys get connected and start to work on the great project for the New Hampshire for anti-racist education?
Yeah, I can kind of start because when that happened at the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter protests in June of 2020, I realized that I kind of had been sitting around on that class and the thoughts I had and not taken any action I felt was really impactful beyond just conversations with family and friends. And so I realized that there needed to be a change beyond just these conversations I was having. So that's when I started the petition to reform the social studies state standards. And that's how Adaeze, that quickly got a lot of signatures, and luckily that was at a time where there's a lot of momentum for change. And so Desi, you had reached out to me at that point, and we realized that this was not going to be a one-person job, and that we needed to partner and work together on this. And so that's really where the very beginnings of NAIR started. And I don't know if Desi, you want to kind of like pick up from that point.
Yeah. And similar to Grace, it wasn't until my college experience that I was able to reflect back on the education that I had received while growing up in New Hampshire, specifically education that emphasized the role that racism continues to play in a lot of the systems that we participate in, including economics, health, and education. And being from New Hampshire in a place where it was the norm narrative was that racism was a thing of the past and we don't have to quote unquote worry about that anymore. I was very frustrated in seeing these instances of like explicit racism and racial prejudice play out amongst communities of color, and really seeking like an opportunity to affect change in the community that I grew up in. And so when I saw Grace's petition circulating, I was really excited because I was like, wow, something's happening here. And like, I immediately wanted to like take that opportunity to give what I could to the community, to that movement. And so when I reached out to Grace and we talked about what we saw this looking like moving forward, it was just like such a wonderful connection, such a blessing, like a blessing, honestly, the fact that we were able to get connected and that we're sitting here where we are now with NAIR. And so much of this journey has been really humbling and also really educational and impactful to us and to all the people that we've been fortunate to come in contact with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's great that you were able to meet you were able to meet and both of your passions connect about making the change in reference to education. The one thing that I noticed, I share when I first moved here to New Hampshire, and my kids were young at the time, and I was looking for like daycare centers and just, thinking I was naive coming from Georgia to New Hampshire. I'm thinking that across the board that all the states were the same. They did, everything the same, everything was kind of in unison. And to my disbelief, once I get here and I'm looking for schools, it's like, okay, where do I place my son into a school where he may feel welcome, or it may be someone who looks like him so that he can feel like, hey, this is community. It didn't exist. Also, too, another thing that kind of, raised my eyebrow in reference to schools and the teaching was when Black History Month came about. And again, coming from the South, the celebration starts for the whole month. And I learned that, it's not just Black History Month, it's this all history, it's American history. We just have a month it's celebrated in. And when my kids, they would come home and they're like, in the month of February, we're celebrating Health Month. We're celebrating National Something Else Month. So again, me being naive, thinking that this was across the board in all the educational systems, that this is something that's standard in the curriculum to teach Black History Month. And it's not. They came home with like one worksheet of Martin Luther King, and it was like a crossword puzzle. And that was pretty much the gist of it. And I knew at that moment that there was work to be done. Of course, I didn't want to dive in right away because again, it's right when we moved here, I'm still trying to get my feet planted. I want to make sure that this is something that I want to do, I want to carry out. But as the years went on, I'm seeing like it's non-existent when it comes to talking about our Black history and American history. So with that, what is one thing that you wished, and both of you have said that, you learned this once you got in college. So it's kind of like, now I'm an adult and, let me move you on your way. I've taught you things that we want to teach you. And then now you realize that the things have being taught, or they're not true. So what is one thing that you wish that you would have kind of like, or may have picked up on early on before realizing that this was something that needed attention? Once you got to college.
I can jump in first here. I think I would say that I wish that the term racism wasn't the word that people ran away from. I wish that there was more willingness to engage in conversations that named it explicitly, and also like allowed people to come and sit and discuss it and hear even individual stories, especially from the individuals, like the people who are part of these marginalized communities, because we are so few, especially in New Hampshire. So our stories and our experiences can get lost in spaces where it's like a white majority, but that doesn't make our experiences any less valuable, and it doesn't undo the effect that these experiences have on our lives moving forward. So that's one thing that really sticks out, is wishing that people would be willing to approach these conversations that explicitly name racism.
Mhm, mhm. Now, how do you have these conversations of race? It's like one of those things, I think back to, when I moved to New Hampshire, I didn't think about I would start conversations about race and having these conversations about race. And I tell people it's still uncomfortable to have these conversations because of, you know, it's just challenging to have the conversations. And for me, I've just realized that I just ask the questions. I just started to ask the questions because I think that if we don't ask the questions, the conversations will never start. And we can talk about race among our race, but when you're involving someone else, I think at that point it becomes sometimes a sensitive topic and sensitive discussion, because now you're really putting yourself out there, and then you don't want to feel like you're forcing someone to engage in this conversation. So I welcome those who are willing to have this conversation, those who are wanting to learn, those who are asking questions, and that's how I direct my conversations. But as you guys are being the younger, well, I say younger because you are younger than I am, the younger generation, how do you have these conversations in your circle? Is it something that has to happen, like, George Floyd being murdered, and now it may be an eye opener? Or do you say, hey, what do you feel about this? Or how do you feel about that? How do you start those conversations in your circle?
Something that makes me think of too is kind of when you're touching on also the point of education. For me, the class that I had my freshman year was my first teacher of color, which is crazy to me. I didn't have a teacher of color until I got to college. But having him bring his perspective to the conversation, and then in the classroom, it was like very open and reflective. So that was what, for me, I was able to kind of reflect on my own experience and question, like, why did I feel this way? Why did I think these certain things? And why was I taught? And kind of that questioning rather than feeling like, and I think that's kind of when thinking about having these conversations going forward, that really made an impact on me and with my friends, and kind of how do we question why things are the way they are, and how is there context around what's happening. And I think also just on the point too of like the education that we receive, I think as Adaeze mentioned earlier, we were taught in such a way that racism is a thing of the past. It's not a problem anymore. It's done. Check that box. It's over now. Rather than kind of contextualizing what's going on and how what's happening today and the disparities we're seeing today are directly connected to all of the like events. So I think kind of the way that we're taught to is that I think it lacks the contextualization that I wish I had and I've gotten in my college education, but feel like I missed out on through my public education before, up through 12th grade. But yeah, I think in conversations now, it's really the questioning and kind of reflection, the inward work it starts with the conversation, but it's really, I think, personal work too, that does a lasting impact.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree with you, Grace, on that. I also have been realizing and even watching the way some of these quote unquote dialogues, but it honestly ends up being a debate on social media platforms when people try to have these conversations. But it's become such a space of attacking people and dehumanizing people in a space where they're already uncomfortable. So it ends up being unproductive when you're coming at it with such hostility or just such judgment. And one thing that recently has come to mind too with this work and having these uncomfortable conversations too, in addition to the internal work and the questioning and the reflecting, which are crucial and can't be like separated from this work, is also checking the way you're approaching people. And there's this quote from a podcast that I listen to called To My Sisters podcast, but they talk about and define accountability and what accountability looks like. And they say that accountability is checking people with grace and forgiveness with an actual desire to see them change, and not to just come and say that you're wrong, you're a terrible human being, and then walking away, but saying like, I'm here to draw this certain thing that I see in you out, to call it out, and also encourage you to be grow in this journey to become better as a human being, because it's detrimental to you as well as the people that you're negatively affecting. And I just remember hearing that, and it was so powerful to me, because I don't see so much of that with sometimes the way that this topic is approached in conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think too, building on that, I think in our work, we've seen the power of like relationship and trust in these conversations and in this space. And thinking about when you were, Adaeze, just mentioning the way that people address this on social media, I think that lacks the connection that needs to be happening for these conversations to have the impact. And like there's a quote like we love of just like this, for this work to be transformational, it has to be relational. And I think that really ties into how these conversations are really about the relationship that you have with one another. And then like I reflecting on my own experience in having these conversations and my own questioning is though being open to asking questions, but to ask those questions and to be vulnerable with like the thoughts I might have had or the way I might have been taught, it has to be really with someone that I trust and know, to have that like comfort level with maybe being wrong and being told that something I have thought was true is incorrect. So I think that relationship piece is like key to having a powerful conversation.
Mm-hmm. I think that is so true that you mentioned that, and it's vital for both parties to realize that, first having that trust issue and then having a relationship outside of, if you disagree with me or we both disagree, but we still have the friendship and the relationship and enough to respect one another's opinion. And knowing that, you're my friend, I'm your friend, but we don't always have to agree on things. And I think too, it's good to keep that open. It's good to keep those things on the table, because you can come back to that. You can come and revisit that, because you never know if that person that may have disagreed with you or vice versa, you'll come back and say, hey, I now understand what you were saying. I understand how you were feeling in that moment. And that's one thing that's for the community of Know the Patterns, is when I started this online community, I wanted to be something that is people that I knew, people that, have seen me in the community, they've seen me do the work in the community, and it's just seeing my face. It's not somebody who's now just popping up all of a sudden, and now you want to talk about race. No. So I feel like I've put the work down, but also too, we're all adults. And I say that to say, when you're an adult and you want to have this conversation, I understand that we may not always agree on certain things, but I want to get your perspective, because we're in the same community. We're coexisting. We're here, and we're more alike than we are different. And I just want your opinion on something, and when we have these conversations, like real heart to heart, I feel like that's like breaking the ice, so to speak, but it also builds that foundation in building a more solid community base and those people around you. And you really know who support you. You really know those people who are really going to support you and back you. So what do you feel, or how do you feel like your work is going to impact the community on where you live, where you guys are? Or actually, you know what? It's going to be for New Hampshire, because you're speaking for New Hampshire.
Do you want to go, Grace? Or
yeah, I can take this for sure. Yeah, I think for where we're hoping to go with there, and so also I guess something we haven't necessarily addressed is like we had the petition and kind of how do we get where we are now, because I think that will kind of connect some of the dots too. So after we started that petition to address the standards, but we realized quickly, we started talking with teachers and understanding the perspective of the people who would be impacted by this change. And we recognized that the standards aren't necessarily as impactful as we thought. So changing the standards isn't going to change the way the individual teachers can, or the different lesson plans they might teach, but also more importantly is changing the standards isn't going to change a teacher's personal opinion on this topic and how they're able, if it says in the standards you have to have these conversations, but they're not necessarily, their heart isn't in the right place to have the conversation and they haven't done that personal work, then it could do more damage than anything. So that's why we took a step back from addressing the standards and have kind of shifted focus. Also, when talking with teachers, we realized that the student voice is not really empowered as much as it should, and it should be. It's not really listened to. So when there's reform happening, it typically includes the voices of teachers, maybe parents or like adults in the community, and like the school board, but it doesn't, there's oftentimes the student voice is really looked over, even though they are the ones getting directly impacted by this education because because of their age, it's assumed that they don't have a place at this table. So I think that's something we recognize is like a huge flaw in the way that our education system manages reform and like values the students. So kind of like going forward, I guess. So now we've shifted to focusing on the student voice and definitely trying to empower the different people doing the work in their communities, because so many insights. But another thing we learned was that like the local districts also have a huge impact on their individual curriculum that gets adopted and implemented in the structures rather than the necessary influence of the state. So where we're kind of hoping to go now is to tie together or to connect the different organizations or groups of people that are leading work in their own communities, be able to make that change across the state, because each community is at a different place in this work and has different needs that need to be addressed, and some might be further along than others. And I think that's something we've noticed in this as well, is like there's so much nuance to it that one blanket change is not going to meet everyone's needs. So that's kind of, I think, where we're at now. But yeah, Desi, what have I kind of skipped over or missed?
No, I think you said it perfectly. In general, the work that we're trying to do is engaging people where they're at, and with the emphasis on the students, because they're the ones most impacted by the education that they receive, and then go on after receiving this education to now become active citizens in our society. And if they're not equipped the way they should be, then we should reconsider like the success of our supposed education system, I would say at that point. And so as we continue to like push forward with NAIR's mission and goals, we're really hoping that people are willing to be engaged and reflect in themselves first, and then be willing to also connect with others who are committed to this work long term, make those community partnerships, and like not also try to do this work alone. Because if another insight, just to add to the list that Grace had, is like this work is incredibly collaborative. And so trying to attempt to do it yourself when there are people right next to you who are also doing it, and maybe even further along, have insights that you could learn from that could help you do it better. It's important not to lose sight of how valuable those partnerships can be.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you're collaborating with other organizations and you go to present the new, where do you present? Like, who do you go speak to? Do you meet with you're meeting with the board of directors or the student councils or the PTAs, or are you meeting with those folk and letting them know, hey, this is what I feel, or this is what we have going on, and this is what we want to present? Or who are you taking your information to so that you can, get one step ahead?
Yeah, I guess kind of where we found our place in this work is not necessarily being creators of more information and going different places with our own like new information to provide, but rather kind of trying to uplift the work that's being done, because there is so, especially like not knowing what each district needs, it would be hard for us to go in, growing up in Nashua, to go into Concord and say, this is what our experience was, and here's what we think needs to change in your community, even though we haven't grown up there and we don't know the current, like we don't live with the current situation. So what we've kind of found is like our space is really actually using social media to share out different perspectives and different experiences that people have shared with us to connect with others. And I think like long-term would be, our goal would be to connect teachers or organizations doing this work with each other, so that like we don't really see our place as providing the additional information or resources, because there is so much out there and so many groups already doing that work, but trying to just make those connections so that people, as Desi mentioned earlier, aren't reinventing the wheel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that makes sense. Especially again, if you didn't go to that school, or now you're trying to just insert yourself because you feel like this is something that's needed. I know it's a lot of manpower hours that go in behind that, and then you don't know what agenda they may be on. So that does make sense. Adaeze, what does community mean to you?
I'd say community means a space where everybody has interest of their fellow community members in mind. And it's a space where trust exists, respect exists, and the goal is to create a space where people can access what's needed to be their best selves. And I also would say community is a place that includes accountability, and it's a place where you can be checked with grace, with love, and encouraged to improve upon the mistakes you've made, because we're all human, nobody's perfect, and we will make those mistakes, but being able to be met where you are to rise above that, I think is an important aspect that community should have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Every community should have that, right? So you guys say that you engage mostly on social media, and that's pretty much how you, one of the platforms that you use to connect, which I know social media can be a monster. How do you deal with like the negativity? Like, I know it's there, it's very draining, and how do you push forward through that? Grace.
I think we try to have, rather than, so we haven't had, luckily, too many instances where people have come at us or like really said negative things about our work. But in the few that have happened, rather than saying like, well, XYZ, this is why your statement is wrong, rather like, why do you think this happened? And trying to respond with questions rather than more facts or information, because we feel like at that point too, it's not necessarily like, it's like just going to hit a wall if we're just sending more information their way where they already have their stance, but asking them to kind of question their own beliefs. But so luckily, like in terms of our work, we haven't had too many people really been negative, so that's been good. But I think social media can be really tiring, and it's hard too, because there's a lot of performative posting on social media, and that's something we still like kind of wrestle with, is should we post, and what's the value of what we're putting out, and we don't want to like overwhelm if there's already enough information out there on a certain topic. Like, is it our place to speak on this, or do we let the others doing the work share their voices? So it's an ongoing kind of challenge that we're even like wrestling with and haven't really fleshed out. But in terms of like people directly like coming to us with an opposing view, is really just asking them to question or reflect like their own perspective.
Mm-hmm. And I like that approach for just questioning, like, why do you feel this way? Or did an incident happen to you to make you, look at give you the perspective of everyone in this race is this way, or everyone in that race is this way. Like, who told you that, and where are you learning this? I like that approach, as opposed to making them feel as though you don't know. Like, you don't know, you need to catch up, you need to stay, on top and up to date. But who are we to say that this information is right. I think, when we just share our experiences, I think that's how we're able to connect more with one another when it comes to sharing your personal experience and they're sharing their personal experience. And again, it's like going back to what I initially mentioned, is that we're all more similar than we are different. So I like the approach of kind of like drawing them in, asking those questions instead of saying, being that teacher. No one wants to be talked to through social media unless it's like, health or how do you lose weight or something like that, of course. But when it comes to education, I think, or education reform or speaking anti-racism, I think those are like those touchy subjects and topics that come up. Now, what is one way that you're looking for the community to support you? Adaeze.
I'd say that we're hoping that members of this community will not have lost momentum in this work, because we realize like there's so much of the momentum initially started June 2020, post George Floyd's murder, the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, and we don't want it to have like lost its place on our priority list. Even Breonna Taylor, like there were so many posts like happening around that time, and now that it's a year later, I'm hoping that people don't think that we've overcome that, because those posts aren't as frequent anymore. Mm-hmm. And so, in addition to remembering the priority and committing to this work, the support is also kind of channeled through their own self-reflection, and being able to start there before moving forward. I think engaging with this work, just knowing like where you stand with this, what work you need to do as an individual before moving forward, we would say is important. And then additionally, and Grace, you can speak more to this as well, we have a project that we are now hoping to launch this summer that is specifically tailored to connecting the champions or the bright spots across the state who are really committed to this work and really excelling as examples to other districts, other teachers who are looking for what it is that they can do better and how they can do better. And so this like Champions Bright Spots project is involving us interviewing teachers from districts across the state to learn about their approach to both diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as anti-racism work and curriculum. And there's anything else to add, Grace?
No, I think you got it all. I think it was very well
said. Grace, Adaeze shared a quote that she likes earlier with us. What is one of your favorite quotes?
I think, was it the for this work to be transformational, it has to be relational, or?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that we both love that quote. So.
Okay. Good. So on an average day at NAIR, what is the vibe like? What are you ladies up to?
Oh man, I think it's a lot of collaboration, and we right now are juggling like work and school, and work right now for both of us is very busy. So carving out the time in the evening has been like the way our work has been happening, and finding like that free time that we have, I guess. But it's definitely been super collaborative, and it's been really helpful having the team too, because I know there's times where I get very off, chaotic, life happens, or like just kind of drift away from this focus, and then having Adaeze pull me back into it and motivate me, and then have conversations with different organizations, that has been really like motivating too, to keep the momentum going and stay inspired. So I think like the typical work is kind of just calls on Zoom and checking in and working through this together.
Mm-hmm. And that support definitely goes both ways, because this isn't necessarily pick-me-up work. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful that Grace is the one that I was able to find to like take this adventure with, because like the teamwork has just been very much appreciative of the fact that when one of us is like just feeling the weight of all of it, the other person has been there to pick the other up. And so that's just been really essential. And we've been so blessed to even come in contact with so many individuals who've been able to lend their skills and their talents and their time to the projects and the initiatives that we are trying to put forward, including our workshops and like the bright spots and champions project.
Mm-hmm. And finding your tribe is very important, especially when you're wanting to do this work. You're wanting to, again, keep the momentum. You want to stay focused. You want to have enough energy to put in clear thoughts, clear goals, define what you're wanting to accomplish, and be intentional about it. I want to thank both of you for being here and just sharing what you're doing on the other side of New Hampshire, and which ultimately will lead down here in the Seacoast. But we're doing the work, and it is so good to see that the younger generation, yeah, because you're younger than me, younger generation just stepping up and making your voice being heard, and you're making a space. You're creating that space for other leaders who may come after you and who look up to you as to what you're doing in the community and want to take part and participate. So it's excellent that you both met under those circumstances, and sometimes things happen. It's meant to happen that way, whether they're good or bad. And then beautiful things like this are created, like the New Hampshire for Anti-Racist Education. So before we leave, I want to make sure that you share with us where we can find you on social media.
Yeah, so I think our Instagram and our Facebook are linked. So on Instagram, if you search Reform 603 EDU, that is where we haven't posted in a little bit, but we're working to get, as we're kind of like, we've had some background work going on. So we're hoping to get more active again. So if you notice we haven't posted on there in a little bit, we are getting back into it, but we can be reached through there or through, I would say right now to our website is probably through the contact on our website is probably the best way that we will make sure we can get back to people and see your message if you do want to reach out.
Awesome. I'll be sure to include that information in the description of the video. And for those of you who are watching out there, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday evening. And to learn more about Nota Patterns, please visit notapatterns.com, or if you'd like to become a sponsor, you can learn more information there too. Again, we're wishing you peace, love, and community. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you so much. Good night, everyone.